like your branding looks a bit of a mess and perhaps your audience just isn't recognizing things that are coming from your brand, then you might be lacking at brand consistency, and this is bringing your brand down. So let's take a look at some of the mistakes you might accidentally be making that are bringing your branding down and leaving your branding feeling like a mess and really inconsistent. First of all, you might not have any clear underlying message. Your branding should actually be communicating a message. So if you haven't actually got clear about what that message is and made sure that your brand identity communicates that, then things are always going to feel a little bit of a mess and not quite right. If you don't take the time to work out what it is that your brand should communicate, then you're going to struggle with your branding because you're never quite sure about what it should be saying, how it should feel, and that message that it should convey. So what ends up happening is that things just don't feel like they align. You always feel like something about your brand is off, and because of that feeling, you're often experimenting, often trying out different things because you're always feeling like something isn't right and I can't figure out what it is. You're easily getting led astray by different ideas and trying to do different things, trying to make it feel like that right fit, and it never feels quite right. And what's going wrong is you're not actually getting clear about this is exactly what I want to communicate about my brand, then making sure that your visuals communicate that. So if you're feeling like your branding's a mess, make sure you've got really super clear about what it is your brand should communicate. So this includes things like your brand story, your messaging, your audience, your niche, what your offers are, what your values are, what your mission is, and the why behind your brand. All these things need to come together to really communicate a message. And that way you'll be able to build a brand identity that feels like the perfect fit because it actually is about what your brand is about, not just a beautiful aesthetic that you liked in the moment. Next, your brand might be missing rules. Sure, you might have a logo, some fonts and colors, but if you don't have rules about how these can be used, you can end up looking inconsistent in how you actually roll them out and use them. You might use a lot of a particular color most of the time, but then another time you think, oh, actually, I might use that color differently this time. Or you might be really inconsistent in how you use your fonts. Rather than always having one font that's always your titles, another font that's always your body copy, you start switching them around. And things can very easily start to look inconsistent and messy because you haven't actually set rules for how your brand elements should be applied and how they should be used. This is when you need a brand style guide. This is where you lay out all the rules of your branding and how all those brand elements should be applied and the rules to follow. That way you're going to create graphics that are going to be very consistent and have a very consistent brand style. Another common mistake is throwing in random things that aren't actually part of your branding. So maybe you're working on a graphic and you really need something and you realize you don't have that in your branding. Maybe it's an element or some kind of graphic of some sort, or maybe it's an extra color. Maybe there's just something that you feel is missing for that graphic. You just go grab something random just so that you can get that graphic done. But the thing is, if you keep doing that, things are going to feel very inconsistent and messy because you've got all these random things that are just showing up that aren't part of your actual branding. Now, of course, things like photography, you're not going to have a full set of photos that you always use for your brand. There's going to be certain rules in terms of style instead when it comes to those sort of things. You have to lay down, this is the kind of style that we'll always be using for my brand. But if you're throwing in random other elements all the time and you haven't done them in a way that really truly aligns with your branding, then you're going to end up looking really inconsistent. But when you find this happening, it can actually give you some clues as to things you need to be adding into your brand. If you keep finding that there's certain things that you're needing, maybe it's a sign that that's something you should work on to actually add to your brand identity. Maybe you need some more brand elements. Maybe you need another font. Maybe you need a few more colors in your color palette. Maybe you need a pattern. Start noticing if there's gaps in your brand identity and actually start adding those elements to your brand so that you're not reaching for random things rather than things in your brand identity. Next, you haven't thought about how your brand should look on each platform because every platform is slightly different. They all have different things that work well, different algorithms, so your brand is going to show up slightly differently on each. But if you haven't taken the time to plan that out, you can end up with them actually looking vastly different and it doesn't actually feel like it's all coming from the same brand anymore. So before you get too caught up in, oh, well, I have to make it look this way for this platform and this other way for that platform and that's what works well on that platform and all those things, go and screenshot all your different platforms, see how it all looks now and does it actually fit together and it'll look like it's the same brand. Or other things where you've just gone a little bit too far a different way. When it comes to these sort of things, it can also be handy to go back to your original mood board, making sure that no matter what you create, that it always has that same feeling to it. You're always conveying that same underlying message and always having that same feeling to your brand. So even if there's different things you need to emphasize or done slightly differently to suit different platforms, it all still feels like it ties together and is all coming from the same brand. Finally, going back to that mood board, you may not have an overarching feeling and vibe. So this means that no matter what you put out there, you are really sure about the feeling and vibe that your brand should have. So you should have a really good mood board, often with a few keywords added to it too to help describe how the brand should feel. And this is something that you can constantly reference. So as you create new things, maybe you're putting out a new product, maybe you're doing a special campaign or launch or event, no matter what you do, if you're doing something new or slightly different, you can always refer to that mood board to make sure, does it still align with how my brand should feel? So that even if the style or look is a little bit different, maybe you're trying to do something that strays a little bit from the main brand, maybe it's a bit like a sub-brand, like a product or some sort of event. But if you've got that mood board and you're making sure, does it still have that same feeling, then it's going to feel part of your brand and not going to feel messy and inconsistent. So make sure that you keep that mood board somewhere where you can easily reference it all the time, so you keep reminding yourself, this is how my brand should feel. No matter what I do, no matter what I put out there, this is the feeling that I want to be creating. So I hope that this has helped you notice any areas where you might be accidentally making your branding look a little bit more messy and inconsistent, so that you can work on those areas and build a much stronger, robust brand that is memorable and recognizable and consistent. And if you'd like to learn more about branding, graphic design, and creativity, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.